Hello everyone, and welcome to the Divorced Dad Diaries, and I'm your host, Stéphane Jutras. So before we start the episode, the first episode of the year actually, I wanted to take the opportunity to wish you all a very, very happy new year. And as I always say, and that's one thing I always wish for everyone, it's a lot of health. I mean, without health, everything else is really irrelevant, really. So hopefully everybody's healthy. You are, your friends and family. Also wishing for a great year, a better year than last year. That's what I always tell myself, every year to be a bit better than last year. So I know for some of you is a bit challenging, but hopefully this year there'll be a lot of chances to get closer to the ones you love and maybe to get some closures and less issues. So I wish you all the best year to come in 2023. So this week for this episode, as you probably noticed, just looking at the title, I'll be talking about to serve or not to serve. So as we discussed before, a lot of times when you go through a separation, the first step really that you do is try to do it amicably. And for that, usually you'll go and try to write down or kind of get some kind of, divorce agreement, if you want, between the two parties. So that works if the two parties are willing to do it and they're willing to sit down, and if everybody agrees about pretty much everything, or at least the big topics, what about the home, the money, and the kids usually. So if there's agreements already before that, it's pretty easy. So you just basically have to find maybe a mediator if you want to have some outside opinions and idea on how to write an agreement. Or at the end of the day, you could even do it yourself. So the challenge really for all this is to agree on what will be in that document. So what happens is, it's something that basically I've never really talked much in detail in my previous episodes. And it's something that I realize definitely very important. And I think I'm not the only one realizing that. I thought that it would be a great topic for this episode, just to talk about basically, what it is, when to do it, what's part of that document as well. How the serving works and things like that. So just those steps. And again, it's something that might kind of look and feel a bit excessive at the beginning because you said, you know what, I'll make sure that we agree upon and we basically write down what we want. But definitely at some point in time, it kind of becomes necessary. And I'll explain why it does. So if I go back a bit, like on my story, just to give a bit of perspective and what happened on that front. Is, at first when we decided to separate, I really thought everything will be kind of done amicably. And that was the agreement between us. But at the end, we tried some mediators and actually we tried two. Never worked out. Never kind of got to an agreement between each other and even with what the mediator was saying. So it was really kind of stalling. And at that point, as I mentioned in my previous episodes, it was a bit challenging because obviously I was the only one working at the time and I was paying mortgage. I was paying pretty much all the expenses. And at the same time, I was paying my new apartment and all the expenses on my side as well. So I was kind of stuck with basically two lives together, and money was bleeding quite fast. So having all that dragging and really not giving results, I was kind of a bit desperate. So that's where I decided to get a lawyer just to help because at that point I didn't know what to do. So I got a lawyer and, talked about her about my situation and what was happening. And basically it had been a couple of years that we're trying to get the mediation going and get the agreement. It didn't work. And it was pretty much, nothing was moving. And the problem is at that time, until you have the agreement or until you go to court, it's pretty much a statu quo. So I wasn't able to just say, you know what, I'll stop paying the mortgage because I don't live in the house. Or you know what, I'll stop paying her car because, we're separated now. So what happens is until you get basically in front of a judge and you finally get kind of judgment or court order and the agreement is going in front and is approved, basically it's mostly the statu quo. And to protect, I guess, both parties as well. Like I said, makes sense. But it doesn't make sense when it takes so long and at the same time you're the only breadwinner and you're the only one basically taking care of everything. So it was definitely becoming a big, big challenge. So something had to be done. Yeah. So at that point, I got a reference for a lawyer from my brother. And I went to see her and we started discussing. And she said, you know what? The thing you have to do, you have to basically come up with a document and serve the papers, the divorce papers to her officially. So that way, when you start serving the paper, everything, the clock start ticking. And basically, there's a time for resolution at that point. And the lawyer at that point as well does all the follow-ups and everything. So the most important thing is once you serve the paper, they have a certain time to respond and the clock starts ticking. And, as much as it's a shock for the other party sometimes, it kind of shows how serious you are and how serious the situation is. And again, it helps making things going forward. So a lot of times, I hear people and, discussing with friends and reading and I hear people that they trying to to have an agreement and they don't really want to officially get a lawyer and serve the paper or just serve the paper. Again, you don't necessarily need a lawyer. Obviously, I would suggest it because, they know what they're talking about. They suggest a format and my lawyer took care of everything. So we just had a couple meetings and she drafted an agreement on that one and, I reviewed it and we discussed and she took care of basically everything, getting it signed and sending it to my ex. So for that was great. Again, when you don't know what to do, it's really quite helpful. Another thing, just a little parenthesis on there. I'm talking about lawyers and maybe that would be another great topic for an episode. But knowing what I know now, I would definitely have taken a lawyer a lot earlier, probably at the beginning. And I know it's a lot of money and I know, you have to put some money aside for them. And yeah, it's definitely not cheap. But if I look at my situation and how much money I wasted during those couple of years at the beginning, paying for, like I said, I had pretty much two lives in parallel. And if I saw like the time, and not only the money, but the time you waste and everything started moving when I got a lawyer. So if I had to go back in time and redo all this, I think that's the first thing I would do is basically try to find someone. So just that we're clear, I'm not saying, actually I was saying to go and get a lawyer as soon as possible, but the idea was you can try with a mediator and see where it goes, but definitely not to waste time on that, especially if you're looking for a quick resolution. If everybody's okay and both parties have jobs and basically everybody's paying their own side, I think you can go in mediation and it's not a problem. Or like I said before, if everybody's kind of getting along and there's no issue on that, yes, definitely a mediator is a good idea. And as well, I remember the last mediator that we had actually suggested that we would get a lawyer. So, and they do the same thing. They take care of drafting the agreement. And actually, it's not true. Well, the lawyer does, but the mediator help drafting the agreement with the discussion between the two parties. But they always recommend before doing anything and before filing to have it reviewed by a lawyer. So they tell each party, the mediator says, you know what, you guys should get a lawyer, and can be the same for obvious reason. So they always strongly suggest that the agreement that is drafted during those sessions to have it reviewed by a lawyer to make sure it makes sense and that it's fair and that nothing was forgotten. I think it's an investment, and again, very expensive and probably even more expensive in some of the cases in the US, but at least worth it at the beginning to get things moving. So as I said before I got the lawyer, I was thinking, so how do you file for divorce, right? You went through separation and you want to make it official. And like I said, there's different ways of doing it, but I think it's important to kind of look at how to file for divorce. So again, I did a bit of research and tried to put a bit of structure in the different steps. So this can obviously vary, but I think the steps I'll go through are kind of the main steps for filing for divorce. So obviously the first step, you decide to get a divorce and separate from your spouse. So again, that means that depending where you live, you might have different rules. You might have to, if it's a no fault or fault divorce, or you might have to be separated from that person for at least a year. So there's different ways of doing it. But basically, you decide to go forward for divorce. Often they will ask for the separation date because of that. So the reason they ask is depending what type of divorce you get, you might need a year before you can be filed. So step one, obviously you decide that. Step two, there's the divorce application. So like I said, each province and probably states and everything have different sets of forms, but you can probably go on their website either the state or the province, and get the forms that you need to be filled. You can get the forms from the lawyer as well, or a mediator, like I mentioned before. I mean, I'll probably have another episode as well on mediation, but depending where you live, like for example, here in the province of Quebec, the government gives about 5 hours of mediation for free, if I'm not mistaken. So you can go to a mediator like for 5 hours, and it's completely free if you have kids. So that helps kind of getting things going. So the step 3 is to basically determine the grounds for filing the divorce. That will basically tell you if it's a no-fault or a fault divorce. Again, depending of the jurisdiction, and if you live in the US, in Canada, or even other country, the first thing I would check is if there's a no-fault divorce in your respective country or province or state. And, like I said, there might be some requirements. So, for example, the no-fault divorce here, they require a year of separation. So basically, if tomorrow morning I decide to get a divorce, I need a year separated from my spouse to be able to file. So by the time you get separated, that's why I'm saying the date is important, because by the time you get separated, sometimes you have to count a year. The second type of ground for filing divorce is also fault divorces. So the fault divorces are filed under the ground of, so you can have adultery, if there's any cheating or cruelty, if there's violence involved and things like that. Obviously, you don't have to wait a year on that. And this is basically enough to have a divorce as soon as possible, provided that you come with evidence about that too to substantiate your claim. So definitely you have to get all those proofs. And usually, again, you can do it by yourself if you want, but you can also get a lawyer and get legal representation on that front, just to make sure everything is covered. So again, step 3, no fault or fault divorces. So the step 4 is, it's basically determining if your divorce is contested or uncontested. And you have to specify what type of divorce it is on your application. So uncontested divorce, as it says, usually is, both partners agree. So there's no complication there. And there's a contested divorce when basically there's, the spouses do not agree to get a divorce, or there are terms and things that are not agreed between the two sides. So in that case, basically, both parties have to file a separate divorce application. And that's where, like I said, both of them file a separate application, and you need to have some agreement in there too that are worked on. So there's a few more steps definitely if it's contested. The step 5, if there's a child or children involved, that would basically be a thing that you have to work on. So you have to work on the divorce agreement, the parenting agreement, custody, support, and all this stuff. If it's a contested divorce, each party will provide what they want and trying to work on that and get an agreement between the two parties. If it's uncontested, it might be like both parties agree on how to deal with all this. So it's just a matter of putting that in the document. And basically, once that is done, the lawyer, in my case, took the papers and actually took care of serving them. And that's it. You have to wait until the serve. Usually it's pretty quick. If I look at my situation, by the time the agreement on my side was drafted and the papers were served, it was maybe a couple of days after the agreement was done. It's very quick. It's basically getting a courier and just, having them send over there. So that was quick. After the papers have been served, your spouse has usually 30 days from the day they are served to respond. So that's what I was saying initially. It kind of starts a timer on things to be done. So now you can't just wait forever or pretend that it's this and that. You really have 30 days for it. If I look at the next step, after 30 days are up, if there's no answer that was filed by your spouse, then you can set down your divorce with the court by submitting an affidavit for divorce, a divorce order, and a clerk certificate. So those are the steps. If you look at what happens, it's really the trigger is really when the papers get filed and served that it starts. And for me, that's what basically saved me, because I'm sure we would have lasted many, many more years after. That said, though, it doesn't mean that, the papers are served and the answer back after the 30 days, everything goes super fast. It still took a couple of years because there was an answer, obviously, on the served papers, but we couldn't agree on agreements, and we were going back and forth. So it was a very long process to basically be able to get to an agreement. At that time, at least, there was my lawyer involved, and she was following up, and, she was helping making things go forward. So it went a lot faster again that if I had waited, just staying in mediation or just doing it myself. So I want to go back a little bit about serving the paper. Like I talked before about the steps, to filing for divorce, but just getting a bit more detail about how the serving the divorce application works. Like I said before, once you have filled the information and the divorce application, they need to be served to your spouse. To do this right by law, you really need to ensure that you serve your spouse with the application for divorce, and including all the other papers that are relevant for that. So depending where you are, like for me in Canada, there's some laws that govern any legal papers can be served, and just, drop them in the mailbox and that's it. What I would say is probably check on your side how it goes, but usually there's a bunch of options that are available. So for example, on our case here, you can send them by mail or email. And like as far as mail, you can mail the application to your spouse lawyer or even directly to your spouse to registered mail. So at least you know it was sent. I heard about email too as well, because there's a way to track emails and basically making sure the person has received it, and also secure email. So that's another thing that's starting to be a bit more common. You can do it by courier as well. Again, by courier, you always have something signed and when it's delivered and everything. There's also by fax. It's still mentioned by fax. I don't know if anybody is still using fax these days besides maybe bank. I guess a fax is something still valid. And the exchange can also be directly to your spouse or the lawyer if you want. You can bring the paper yourself there and just, exchange it, and having at least a proof that they were served. So when they get the paper, they'll sign you something that they received the document. So the important thing with the serving is to make sure that if they're served, that you have a proof that they were served. We talk about all those methods, but what if that person doesn't go get the papers? Or what if they refuse to actually get the papers? So that's where you have some services there, and the lawyers takes care of that. And there's some services that actually can track people, like we see. They can track those people and make sure they get served wherever they are. So sometimes, the person doesn't answer at home, but they'll make sure that they go at their work, for example, to serve the papers. So that's another advantage, I guess, of having those papers taken care that way. So you make sure that they're served, and no matter what. So I hope it's a bit clearer about the filing for divorce and the different options you can have to basically go ahead. And if you're stuck, like I said, I talk a bit about my experience. There's various ways of doing it. So it really goes down to what you feel comfortable doing. Obviously, how much money you have or don't have, and also time. I mean, time is always of the essence at the end, because again, if you're stuck paying and taking care, and most of the time is the status quo between the two parties, time becomes very important. And at some point you want it to be done quickly. So that's it for this week. I hope that you found this episode useful. And like I said, if you have any questions about it, you can always send me an email. And as I always say, I'm not a therapist, I'm not a lawyer, but I can definitely help and direct you in the right direction for, any questions you might have. And again, depending on the countries, of the states or provinces, there are a lot of good resources online to tell you what exactly to do if you want to initiate filing for divorce and serving papers and things like that. So I would really strongly suggest to go on the website of your country or states or province and get the information from there. That said, if you have any questions about this show or any other show, please feel free to send me an email at TheDivorcedDadDiaries@gmail.com. Also, if you want to listen to the previous episodes or you need more information or anything related to the podcast, you can go on my website on www.TheDivorcedDadDiaries.com, and you'll be able to find pretty much the links to episodes and some information and everything. Currently working on the website as well, so hopefully in the next little while you'll have a brand new website with much more information to help out if you have any question. Also, you can always reach me on social media. So you can go on Instagram at The Divorced Dad Diaries, or you can go on Facebook as well, Twitter. So you can always reach me there if you have any questions. So please don't hesitate. And even if you want to just say hi, don't hesitate. Just send me an email. Those are always appreciated from my side. So I hope you all have a great week, and we'll talk very soon. Bye-bye.